Okay, this video we're going to set up some automatic doors, really simple doors, so that when the player approaches them, the door will open, and then when they leave, the door will close again behind them. I think in the next video we'll have a look at using like line traces or sphere traces to add an extra level of interaction, just so the player has to like click on them to open the door, click on them again to close them, and then we can use a similar system for collecting items. But for now, nice and simple, very quick one, just automatic doors. We will use the geometry tool to do a couple of things for this, like create a wall, punch a hole through the wall, and I'll also show you how to use the geometry tool to make placeholder static meshes until you replace them with proper ones from Maya or Blender, 3D Studio Max, whatever 3D software you happen to be using. So we'll start off by creating the wall and the door. So I'm going to use the geometry tool for this. You can find the geometry tool up here in the Place Actors tab. I'm going to just click on geometry, and you've got some basic shapes to work with here. So I'm going to just drag in a box. I should point out, don't use these basic shapes here. With the geometry tool you can use additive and subtractive brushes to make custom shapes, and you can use some very simple modeling tools as well, but we'll cover those in more detail in another video. For now I'm just going to show you some basics. So I brought in my box here. Over on the right hand side in the details tab, I'm going to look at the brush settings, and for X, Y and Z here I can change the size. So I'm going to make it wider on the Y, let's say 6 meters. That was the X, so I'm going to put that back to 200. Y 600. I'm going to make it taller, so I'm going to go Z 400. I'm going to lift it because it's currently overlapping with the floor in the air, and I'm going to press the end key. That's going to snap it down to the ground, and then I'm going to make it narrower because I don't want my wall to be that thick. Let's say 10. Alright, cool. Now I need another brush to punch a hole in this wall. So in fact what I'm going to do is hold Alt and just pull out a copy of my wall. I'm going to change the Y to 150 to make it narrower, and the Z to 220 to make it shorter. I'm going to press the end key again. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to change the brush type from additive, which adds geometry, to subtractive, which is going to subtract geometry. So I'm just going to overlap this with my wall, and you can see it punches a hole in the wall, which is interactive in terms of the player collides with the wall and can walk through the gap. So the geometry tool is really nice for doing what they call level blockouts, which is where you're essentially building the basic geometry of your level without committing loads of time to building stuff in Maya. Right, so I'm going to make a door based off of this brush here so that it fits perfectly. So I'm just going to hold Alt and drag out a copy of my subtractive brush. So I've left the original in place and I've made a copy. I'm going to change it back to additive, so I've now got additive geometry. What I need to do for my door, because this is going to be a rotating door, the pivot point for the door is currently set to the center, right? So if I rotate it, it spins around its center point, which is not good for a door. What I actually want is the pivot point to be right down in the bottom corner there, so that it rotates around that point there. So to do that, I'm going to have my brush selected. I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to look for the actor section, and then I'm looking for this little bit here. So under actor, advanced, I'm going to open up advanced, and here we've got a pivot offset. We've got the X, the Y and the Z. So really all I need to do is divide my dimensions of the door, which is 10, 150, 220, in half. So let's start with the X, which was 10. I'm going to put -5 for this one. It looks like it hasn't done anything, but if I click away and reselect, the pivot point is now on the edge of the door. My Y was, what was my Y? 150, so let's half that. Let's go 75. If I click away and click back, you can see my pivot point is now on the edge of the door. and my Z was 220, so I'm going to go minus, so I'm going to take it down 110, and if I click away, click back again, you can see my pivot point is right down there, and if I rotate the door now, you can see that it rotates like it's on a hinge. Now, I can't use geometry for my door. You can't animate it or move it in real time, so I need to turn it into a static mesh. So to do that, I'm going to find the brush settings. Yours will probably be closed, so I'll close mine down, find advanced, and then create static mesh. It's going to bring up somewhere that we want to save it, so I'm going to go content folder, and I'm going to give it a name of SM for static mesh door 01 with underscores in there, and then I'm going to create that static mesh. So this object is no longer a geometry. It is not a geometry brush anymore. It is now a static mesh, and it has become a reusable actor that I can place as many times as I like in the level. Unfortunately, it has lost its collision, so I can just pass straight through it. So let's fix that. So to fix that, I'm going to double click the static mesh to open it into the static mesh editor, and I'm just going to come to the top here, go to collision, and for this I can just add a box simplified collision, right, nice and easy. Save that, close it down, back to the level, press play, and now can't walk through the door anymore. Wonderful. Okay, so that static mesh is good to use, but we don't just want to use it as a static mesh. It needs to have functionality, so it needs to become a blueprint. So I'm going to delete that from the level. I'm going to go into my blueprints folder. I'm going to right click, create a new blueprint class, and we're going to choose the actor class. So an actor is an object that can be placed or spawned in the world. It's the most simple type of blueprint. All of these are actors, but this is the base actor class. So I'm going to create a new actor. I'm going to call it BP underscore, oh, I don't know what happened there, BP underscore door underscore 01. And I'm going to double click to open up my blueprint. I'm going to open up my content drawer here. I'm going to drag my door mesh into the blueprint. There it is. I need to add another component. So I'm going to go add, and I'm going to find, I'll just type this in, box. I'm going to add a box collision. This box collision is going to detect when the player has walked into the box, and then tell it to open the door when the player is in the box and close the door when the player has left the box. So I'm going to make it bigger. So with the box selected, I'm going to change the box extent. So on the X, I'm going to put 200. So that's 200 centimeters this way and 200 centimeters that way. And we'll go 100 on the Y, and then I'll just go 100 on the Z. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I'm just going to roughly line it up at the bottom so it looks something like this. So when our player walks in here, the door will swing open, and when our player leaves, the door will swing closed again. So let's compile and save that. With the box selected, I can come down into its collision settings here, and at the moment it's set to overlap all dynamic, which means it will detect collision with anything essentially. I want to change that, and I'm going to change it to custom. When we change it to custom, we get a whole lot of options here. You can ignore this. This is something I've been experimenting with for the next video, so just pretend that isn't there. I'm going to change all of the collision responses to ignore, except for pawn, which I want to set to overlap. So that means that this object will only respond, this box will only respond to collisions within a pawn, rather than any other type of actor. So physics bodies, vehicles, any static objects or dynamic objects won't cause a reaction to this door, only a pawn. And our player is, of course, a pawn. Alright, with that done, we'll compile and save. Let's go into the event graph and start making things work here. So I'm going to delete all of these starter nodes. To create my first event, I'm just going to right click on the box, add event, and we're looking for add on component begin overlap. So what this will do is when something, a pawn, has overlapped with our box, it will cause something to happen. So I can demonstrate this really quickly by just taking the print string, taking the execution pin out and creating a print string. I'm just going to get it to say hello. So our logic says when something overlaps with our box, it's going to print string the word hello. We'll compile and save, go back to our level, and I'm just going to plonk my blueprint door roughly in place. I'm not too concerned about placement. You know what, that's just off a little bit, so I'm going to change my grid snapping and get that in place. That'll do nicely. Okay, that'll actually do the job, I think. Let's have a quick look, see what happens. So I'm going to press play, I'm going to walk towards my door, and we get the word hello as soon as I walk into that box. There it is again. It's really good. The next thing to do, just to demonstrate some more of this, I'll go back to my blueprint door. I'm going to create the next event, so I'm going to right click on my box again, add event, on component end overlap. This time I'm going to get the execution pin out and search for print string again, and I'll change it to goodbye. So our logic says when something overlaps with the box, say hello. When that overlap ends, in other words, the object now leaves the collision box, it says goodbye. Compile, save that, press play. So we walk into the box, we get hello. We walk out of the box, we get goodbye. So we know that our collisions are working. Let's get rid of these print strings. Nice and simple. We're going to use a timeline again like we did in the last video for crouching, because we want to open our door over time. So let's, next to our begin overlap, I'm going to right click in a bit of empty space and search for add timeline. I'm going to call it door open close. Double click to open it up. Add a new track, a float track. We'll call this one the driver again. I'm going to hold left shift and left click to create my first keyframe. I want the door to open over about half a second, so I'm going to move over here, left shift and left click again. And I'm just going to make sure that my time for the first one is set to 0 for time, 0 for value, and for the second one 0.5 for time and 1 for value. And I'm just going to right click and add auto to the curve so that it isn't linear. I'm going to change the length to match, the last keyframe there, so we don't have loads of empty space on the end. So I'm setting the length to 0.5, compile and save that and go back to the event graph. So that's our timeline done. We'll say, right, when we begin the overlap, we want to play the timeline, and when we end the overlap, we want to reverse the timeline. We need a lerp here for our driver, so we're going to right click and search for lerp. We want the door to rotate, so we need a lerp rotator, and just like before, the alpha is going to drive the lerp between A and B. So as alpha gradually changes over time from 0 to 1, which is what our timeline does, it lerps from A to B. So we'll take the driver and plug that into there. We do need to set some rotational values here, so if we look at the door, its default rotational value is 0, 0, 0, so that's what we want A to be. It starts at 0, 0, 0, and we need to determine what it rotates to. Nice easy way of doing this is just to select the door, rotate it to its rotated position, let's say there. So we want to rotate it to 0, 0, and let's round that to -80. So I'm going to put that back. That was just to check where I want the door to rotate to. Go back to the event graph, 0, 0, -80. So it's going to rotate from here to there when it plays, and when it reverses, it rotates from here to there. The last thing we need to do is drag in a reference to our door, pull the pin out, and we want to use a set relative rotation because we want it to rotate. We can plug our rotator return value into the new rotation and take update and plug that into the set relative rotation. So the logic says when a pawn overlaps with this box, start the timeline to play. That will drive the alpha from 0 to 1, which will cause our rotator value to change from 0, 0, 0 to 0, 0, -80, and that will set the relative rotation of our door. We'll compile and save that. We've also got this as well, of course. End overlap reverses the process. Let's have a quick look. We'll press play. We'll approach our door. It rotates. We leave the door. It rotates back again. Open and close. Nice and simple. Rotating door, automatic door, works well enough. almost. Just got to hit in the face of the door. We can maybe speed up or slow down the rotation of that door. There's lots of things you can do here. I personally prefer to use interaction, so the player has to left click or press the E key or something like that to open the door. But we'll have a look at that in the next video. This will at least just get you started with the general logic. Alright, fantastic. I'll see you for the next one. We'll build on this and make it a little bit more interesting.